So please welcome Matmos.
Thank you.
Drew, Daniel, and Martin Schmidt. I thought it would be best to start our discussion with the song. This is called Lipostudio And So On. And if you look up on the screen there, you can see a very dark rendition of the video that they often play when they play it in concert. What was that sound we just heard?
Damn it.
This is
I'm sorry.
This is a record that we made in 2000 called A Chance to Cut is a Chance to Cure. And it was a record based on a theme of medical technology. We tend to make work which is we regard as conceptual in the sense that we make a conceptual commitment to an idea. Then we think about all the possible actions, events, or objects which express or manifest that idea in a way that could be made sonic. Then we have to go and do the research of getting into situations where we can acquire the recordings of those actions or events or objects. Then we take it home to our studio and build it into music. So one of the things that we were thinking about in terms of ways that medical technology makes sound is, of course, recording the sound of surgery itself. And so we went to plastic surgery clinics. For that track, it's called California, or no, that wasn't California Rhinoplasty, that was Lipostudio. That was also a recording made in Southern California of liposuction. And we recorded these procedures. And I mean, what you're hearing in that breakdown, which is why Martin was like, wait for this part, you know, is not the sound of our friend Stephen Thrower playing clarinet or somebody playing drums, somebody playing guitar. You heard lots of real instruments, quote unquote. But also the sort of solo at the center of that breakdown is a surgeon who knew that what I wanted was something musically expressive, and so he selected a slightly larger cannula, which is the sucking needle that they use in liposuction.
You know the thing that you use to get what I used to call the crevice device on the vacuum cleaner to get in like corners or like in here?
Yeah,
it's
like
sort
in
of
here.
like that.
And he shoves it into the wound and starts sort of playing.
You want me to use the crevice device?
Yeah, let's use the crevice device. And he shoves it into the wound area and starts sort of playing the incision in this woman's body. And she's unconscious at the time. And it's very disturbing, actually, when you see liposuction because they make all the incisions at once around the area, and they all start to bleed. And so you're sitting there in this room. It's a sterile environment. You can't compromise it. You can't touch anything. And you're just moving a microphone around as carefully as you can to try to gather these sounds. But what I didn't expect was that the medical technicians would really get into being musicians and started to kind of ham it up. And they were, you know,
So
playing.
they did ham it up. They were like,
Yeah.
oh, you want...
Yeah, you want me
the
to suck
crevice tool.
louder, you know, go, let's do this. And
Suck louder. How many of us have said that?
And they got, I mean, the nurse technician got kind of emo, and she would like fling down the scalpel on the tray so it would make an extra loud
Well,
noise.
you actually had to tell them to like settle down.
Yeah, I had to tell them to
like
like chill down a little bit, you know, like I just need the sounds of what's happening in the room. And it was an incredible experience for us to work on that record, and kind of personally tricky because I'm a total lightweight. I mean, I passed out giving blood. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not like butch about blood and suffering at all, and so it was.
But he talks a good game.
Yeah, knowing that I was there to capture sound was a way of avoiding thinking about maybe the ethical problems with what we were doing.
But on this particular track, I remember reading an interview where you said you were playing, and you had people playing instruments as well,
Yeah.
and doing things,
Yeah.
and they would play things as though you were trying to sort of make people think, oh, well, that's the liposuction part, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Imitative. Yeah, I thought what would be a good. It ends up being a trio between the surgeon, the saxophonist, and me playing a straw in a bowl of water. And yeah, and I told the saxophonist, and I was thinking myself, like, I want to be the sound of the liposuction more than the, and so there's this, hopefully like sort of crossfade of what's what here.
Yeah, where you can't tell the difference between human fat and a saxophone and water, because sonically, when you know that there's liposuction noises in there, if a clarinet player makes a squelchy sound, you're going to hear that squelch as if it was human fat. And hopefully, if you can manipulate the human fat noises, you can also make them into things that sound more saxophone-like. So it's sort of it's like those Arcimboldi portraits. Have you ever seen those? These Baroque paintings of a face that's made out of a bunch of rotting vegetables or oysters. This is a sort of similar thing of kind of seeing two things at once, like seeing saxophone and human fat as versions of each other. I think that's our goal. If you do that, then it's working.
So that's important in your work to sort of bridge that gap between making sound the issue rather than, this is the saxophone, you can hear this solo, you can hear, this thing, you can hear that thing, and it's all just material for which you can create things.
Yeah, I mean, I think a song can maybe do some powerful work to level down the difference between what's valuable and what isn't, what's a real musical instrument and what isn't, what takes talent and what is random. I like the way that you can kind of level down the differences between those through the kind of control that production gives you. But it might be an illusion. I mean, it's been weird to have people listen to that record and say, oh, I liked it until I found out what it was, and then I didn't want to hear it anymore. I kind of love the idea that you could enjoy something sonically, but then you could be so disgusted by what's contained inside it that you just can't enjoy it anymore. Well, to me, that's more interesting maybe than a record that somebody wants to hear a million times. Is a record that's the version of like a Pasolini movie like Salo that you see once, and then every time you think of it again, you're like, oh, holy shit, I never want to see that again.
We'll talk quite a bit more about the concepts, but I guess I wanted to go back now. And how did you get to the place where you were creating this music? You were growing up, Drew, in Louisville, Kentucky, and there was quite a big punk scene there growing up. And was it mostly hardcore music that was at the beginning for you, a big influence?
Yeah, I mean, I got incredibly into punk rock and hardcore and going to shows, and I wasn't musical. I had no training of any kind, no musical ability whatsoever, but I did a magazine and would cut up images and make sort of standard punk rock collages, and was reading a lot of Burroughs when I was 16, and was reading Burroughs' descriptions of using tape decks to cut up sound and to use cut-ups of sound as ways to change environments or change personality. And so I got a bunch of tape decks, and I started to make tape loop collages, and I didn't have a 4-track, so I would get like 5 tape decks playing sounds and record it onto a 6th, and that would be my like multi-tracking, and you just layer that, and I've just made hours and hours of unlistenable garbage.
Cute parallel lives, because I did that exact same thing. I had a friend who was dyslexic, and the college, when I was in college, I'm 7 years older than Drew, so I was in college while he was in high school. Sadly, I was doing the same things he was doing in high school. But anyway, and the university would give him free cheesy black plastic tape recorders. And so I was like, can you get another one and another one and another one? And he got 6 of them. And that's how I would do multi-tracking as well, as I would record and then play back on one, all with Sparklet's plastic water bottles, that make awesome sort of congas. Those. Do they have those here? They have, those giant blue.
Like the water cooler at the office.
Blue plastic yeah, like that. Hey, like exactly, yeah. Yes, they do have those here. In fact, there's one in the room.
Were you also into rock music when you were
not like Drew? No, pretty much. I was an extremely late music listener. I didn't really even understand why people were interested in pop music until I got really tired of getting beat up. And then I realized, this is this late 70s, mind you. I was like, if I smoke Marlboro cigarettes and grow my hair long and listen to heavy metal music, people will stop beating me up. And I cynically did those things. I bought a pack of cigarettes. I stopped cutting my hair.
What
and
a poser.
I was like, and hung around at the time you could smoke in school. Awesome. and so I started hanging around in the smoking section. What do you know? I stopped getting beat up. I never got beat up again after. People are so lame. They weren't beating me up because I They just like they didn't know where to put me, so they put me in the garbage can.
But he lucked out because he got to see all the like old school California hardcore, like Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, Before Henry, all the like kind of classic hardcore that by the time I was listening to it was like studying something in history class. I mean,
when did it stop becoming a
Doesn't
pose for you, though?
You can imagine how great that makes you feel.
you're so old. It's
everybody
awesome.
does this to every generation, though. Yeah, I mean, how many people like, you saw Jimi Hendrix? That's awesome. You must be so old.
I mean, what was cool about hardcore in Kentucky in the 80s was just the idea that it was
happen to you.
culture that you make yourself. Like you go to a show and it's a basement show and there's 20 kids and everyone in the audience, they're all in bands too. There is less of a division between producer and consumer, and there is no consumption. I mean, my zine cost 10 cents. You know, I made it on a photocopier. It was 5 cents a page. So this idea of like that you can create things, you can do it yourself, it sounds really cliche, and it's been totally appropriated now by languages of advertising and marketing and media. But at the time, it really felt compellingly the case that you could just make things and instantly disseminate them, and that there was no barriers really. And in a place as sort of fucked up and right-wing and homophobic and heavily Republican and Christian as Kentucky in the mid-'80s, you know, it was like an incredible, it was like joining the army to be into punk then. Like it was truly like this sort of drink the Kool-Aid, join this tiny sect of intensely felt commitment.
Was that constricting in a way, though? Like,
Sure,
was there
totally, because it was homophobic too. Mm-hmm. You know, it was like a straight edge scene. So yeah, it definitely had its limitations, and it had formal limitations that which became pretty obvious. That it was about rock and roll, basically, like louder and faster and more distorted, but you know, pretty much formally not as compelling as like the Merzbow and Nurse with Wound records that I was listening to. So the limitations were there.
Drew had actually had someone throw a bone at him from a car one time.
Yeah, it's true. I got punk bashed crazy. Like I kids.
A bone.
Yeah, these kids from Barrett Junior High spat. Have you ever had chewing tobacco in your mouth? Like you ever chewed tobacco? It produces this sort of warm, orangey brown spit. I got chewing tobacco spat in my face, and you feel this like warm brown lump like sliding down your face. And the kids that spat chewing tobacco at me also threw a bone at me. Like they were like fucking cave in Kentucky. Boo-hoo.
We have done chewing on this bone.
So where does, Drew, you wrote a book recently on Throbbing Gristle, and where does Throbbing Gristle come into it for you as a kid? Because I remember reading the first chapter, and you know, you heard this and your mind opened up, Slug Bait and these other songs.
Yeah, I mean, I was basically into punk rock and roll, and then I bought this record by a band called Throbbing Gristle, and I didn't know anything about them, but I thought their name sounded cool, and I thought they would be punk rock, and I put them on, and instead it was just this intense, bassy, throbbing, literally sound that gave me this horrible headache, and I'd never had music that did that to me, that affected me physically, that wasn't about feeling empowered or part of some community or part of some, you know, lonely set of fanatics, but instead seemed like deeply inhuman and anti-human. And so there was something about the intensity of what Throbbing Gristle were doing aesthetically that was very disturbing, and not about belonging, but about sort of a total isolation. And I think that's compelling. I mean, too many people bash electronic music for being inhuman, and it's so cold, and they bring to bear this sort of boring humanist idea about warmth. And I think aesthetically, like, it's a good modernist strategy sometimes to just pound the living shit out of whatever is supposedly human and see what's left on the other side. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that should be the only game in town. But certainly when you're 16, you can relate to that sensibility. Mm-hmm. Maybe not when I'm 39 now. Oops.
I wasn't going to say anything. You spent a year in England as well when you went to college, I suppose?
Yeah, I did a junior year abroad, and it was a good time because it was right when sort of Castle Morton rave happened, and a lot of like ridiculous free sound system parties were happening in the UK. So I got exposed to a totally different aesthetic, but it kind of reminded me of hardcore in the sense that it was pretty ghetto, and it wasn't expensive, and it wasn't about money, and it was sort of autonomous.
Was it the first sort of introduction you had to dance music in a large way?
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and
aside from go-go dancing in gay bars.
You'd been doing that before, and you had met Martin before you went over to England.
That's how we met. I put $1 in his underwear.
Yeah, I was wearing this plastic fish jockstrap that I had made, and like there was a tail that came out my ass, and then I would fit my junk in the fish's mouth, I guess, and Martin
his sort of brain case, lung, head area.
Yeah, and I mean, I also knew that Martin made electronic music because I had seen his band play. He was in this sort of occult industrial band called Yowcore that performed at this punk rock space, Gilman Street warehouse at this...
The punk rock space that gave us Green Day.
Yay! No, boo. Can you believe that they're a Broadway show now? Like, fuck. That must hurt so bad.
How unpunk.
Ouch. It's really over, you know. It's really over. Yeah, I knew about Martin's band because I had seen them play at this event that was hosted by this cult, the Ordo Templi Orientalis, which is a cult dedicated to Aleister Crowley, the great, you know, early 20th century Satanist. And they were all in, you know, leather and straps and looking like dominatrixes. And then there's this really square, suburban-looking guy who was really cute, who made all the rhythms. And I was like, damn, he's hot. So I liked it when you put that $1 in my G-string. And that was sort of how the band got started.
He taught me about techno, because I didn't know that it existed. I was like floating at that point in a world of like late 70s German electronic, you know. I was before Cluster and Faust and that sort of thing became like the, you know, something that everybody knew about. I don't know, in like 1990.
Yeah,
I swear I was kind of alone in that, but like that's what I was super into, was this late 70s German electronic music, which he had never heard. I had never heard of, you know.
I think I made a mixtape that was one of these, like, you're totally crushed out on somebody and you make a mixtape and you just want them to absorb all of the styles that you love, and they have to love it as much as you, and they have to love every song for the right reason. And I think you like turned me on to Cluster and Rodelius, and I made this mixtape that was Nurse with Wound, Meat Beat Manifesto, Public Enemy, My Bloody Valentine, a bunch of breakbeat techno, and some Nurse with Wound. And that's basically like the template. I mean, you imprint really hard in your adolescence on certain records, and I think those... Of course.
And you were already doing stuff production-wise with samplers and stuff.
Yeah. My boyfriend at the time had a house, and if you had a house, you could sign up for a layaway plan where you could pay for a sampler on an installment of like $20 a month. So I got a Roland W30, which was what MC Hammer used. It had
Can't touch this.
27 seconds of sample time per diskette that you put in if you were doing stuff at, I think, 12-bit. And I would put sounds that I wanted to sample onto cassette, speed it up to double time, sample it for 1.2 seconds, then drop it an octave so it could be a 2.4-second loop. And I would sequence by counting numerically the exact length of a sample, and then I would have to chop every other sample into eighths or 16ths or 30 seconds because there wasn't really a way to quantize internally in its sequencer. So you had to do all these funky math tricks in order to get the most out of that 27 seconds of sample time. But it was an incredible lesson in the economy of information, that if you only get 27 seconds of sample time to make a song, then you'd better really fucking care about every single sound. It has to really belong for a reason. It has to be there. I think now that we live in the days of like hundreds and hundreds of gig drives, and people can have 1 million tracks and can just keep piling on more and more information, I think there's less of that gun to your head about what really matters to you. So I think the severity of it was really helpful in certain ways.
And obviously you're trading music back and forth, but also you teaching Martin about, you know, how you were doing sampling and stuff was another thing.
Yeah, he was really amazing with that sampler, but he didn't my come on line to him was like, have you ever used a computer? Because I had a computer, which was like a big deal in 1990, to have something that you could actually record audio onto and edit audio on. And he was like, yeah, I would like
come up and look at my etchings.
Try and edit sound on your computer.
So we spent like months making musique concrète, like cut-ups in sound edit.
Yeah, I mean, our common interest was Pierre Henry. Anybody? Oh, all right. Okay.
Yay, Pierre Henry.
So like late 50s. All right, got 50s pioneer of cutting tape up and tried to invent a new kind of classical music that didn't involve pitches, that just involved the sounds recorded from the world, and that there was this notion that this guy, pretty much not Pierre Henry but Pierre Schaeffer, sold to the French Music Academy, to the government of France, in a way, like, this will be the new music, and it will not involve Germans, which was a really positive thing you can imagine in the early 50s in France. And it was like the most obscure fucking thing you could possibly think of for, like 20-year-olds in 1990. And we both loved it, and nobody knows about this. And
we got really obsessed with one piece in particular, Variations for a Door and a Sigh, which is probably his greatest work. And it's an obsessive piece of tape composition built out of the sound of one creaking hinge in the attic of a French country house. And he spent months analyzing the sound of just one creaking door and working over and over obsessively with manipulating and chopping.
Mind you, this is someone who only has a reel-to-reel tape recorder to work with.
Yeah, the intense kind of labor of love.
It's like a 45-minute piece that's made out of, and it's listenable. It's not
bullshit. There's a lot of
wanky
crap from that period that is sort of modernist in its refusal to give pleasure, but isn't formally compelling on its own, whereas Variations for a Door and a Sigh is powerful. There's something alchemical that seemed to happen in the encounter with this object. And for us, that was really inspiring, the idea that you could commit yourself totally to something that looks on paper like it would be so banal and so uninteresting, but that in fact, if you just trust your materials and force yourself to be almost anorexically committed to like one thing and one thing only, that out the other side comes this really interestingly rich experience. And Henri inspired us, for years. We've been ripping him off, basically.
So perhaps it's a bad example, but I wanted to play something from your first record and just say, okay, this is what the culmination of all of this stuff that you were doing, one of the...
Bring on the bad example.
Well, I think it's interesting because, the Lipostudio and that song, Lipostudio to a lesser extent, but, you talk a lot about all of this stuff, and then you make stuff that's exceptionally listenable.
And yet it is made out of those things.
Well, that piece wasn't. I mean, that's from our first record, which came out in 97, but we had made the tracks around like 93, 94, 95 for a while, just getting to know each other. And I think when you're making your first record, you're really letting your influences hang out, and you're just trying to sound often like records that you love. And I was listening to tons of things like Chaotic Chemistry. That this is an incredible early drum and bass record called LSD EP. That's one of the most like chopped up breakbeat techno records ever. But frankly, it is like, I do feel a little embarrassed when I hear that track because it's just so strongly like my first jungle. It's strongly derivative of other music, and I just got to own it. I mean, we've been having a good time playing it live. We just played at this anniversary of the SF MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, and it was really fun to play that track live because in a way, playing like a completely traditional sounding drum and bass track in 2010 is like hilariously anachronistic and sort of awkward aesthetically, because electronic music's sort of justifying rationale for so long was always that it was futuristic or that it was about the future. And there's nothing less sexy than the recent past. Like if you watch a movie made in 2002 that was incredibly trendy in 2002, like I don't know if you've seen the Alex Cox adaptation of the Revengers tragedy, but it's this incredibly London stylish 2002 movie. And when you watch it now, your skin just crawls. And it's worth thinking about if you're going to make electronic music, because it's so easy to participate in a scene and to get the sounds and the production ticks and tricks that are cool right now in the last 10 records that you heard this month. It's so easy to blend in, and you just have to be aware of what you're doing, especially if you're going to put out a record, because that record's going to last a long time. In our case, like I'm feeling like a weird trickle of cold sweat listening to something that I made in 96.
So in your work now, do you think about timelessness?
I mean, it's always, if it's been a source of argument between us always since then, that I was like, you're making something that's not going to last. I mean, I say pretentious shit like that, but when you're alone in the studio, you figure no one's ever going to hear you. So this is not timeless. It doesn't partake of timeless woo, but it's true. It's something to think about.
I don't know, dude. That Goldie album was called Timeless, yo.
Yeah, well, exactly. Ow.
You can't be timeless. That's impossible. You're always a reflection of the total set of forces in the room that are part of why you're doing what you're doing.
But you can choose. I don't. There are choices there.
It's about yeah. I mean, sorry. Go on. ... We've only had 3 hours of sleep. I don't know if I need to point that out or if it's already completely obvious.
Well, this goes to a question I had anyway. Clearly, you're
jet lag
collaborating.
is a state of timelessness, I guess, is my answer.
Clearly, you're a duo. Is it always arguments in the studio or every single track?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, we've gotten into huge, I will leave you arguments about do we put reverb on the snares? And we've been together 18 years. We've made 8 albums. We've done a lot of tours. We put a lot of extra pages in our passport, and we still scream and yell about the most retarded, trivial shit imaginable. And it's a function of caring about your details and sweating the details. I think it'd be easier maybe we were intuitive people who just sit down and express. But
what you mean, I'm going to make a song about
my pain is real.
Well, with the recent album, you even had different track listings for the vinyl and the CD.
Oh, yeah, we were...
There it is. There it was. There was Drew's record and Martin's version of the same record.
We were still having horrible arguments while mastering the record. And when you're mastering, it's okay, you really need to know, is this song on the record or not? And we couldn't...
I could.
Yeah, well, so could I. So yeah,
except we're supposed to take turns on who's in charge of these records, and it was my turn. And what ended up happening, Drew?
Martin did the CD, and so the CD is Martin's version of the album, and the vinyl is my version of the album.
That is such fucking bullshit.
And then you're dicking.
I absolutely feel it right now.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
You're still wrong.
I can't believe that
You're still wrong.
let you do that.
And we dick the consumer
it was
3
your
different ways
idea
because
to we'll take turns being in charge of the records. Your idea.
And so now we have these signs in the studio when we're working on a record.
I took them down and threw them away.
That would say Martin is in charge of the new Matmos record. So when I'm about to argue with him, I'll just look at the sign and be like,
the record we're talking about.
But that's not the real version of the record. You need the vinyl, because it has the track that we did with Terry Riley that's really awesome.
Which isn't as awesome as Drew thinks it was.
So yeah,
Terry Riley is great. This song just didn't turn out that well.
You're just wrong.
I don't even know where to begin from here.
By saying, Martin, you're right.
Martin, I really like the CD version of the record. Drew, I haven't heard the vinyl version of the record. I'm sorry.
More to enjoy. Yeah, collaboration is difficult. It's difficult because electronic music appeals to control freaks, right? It appeals to solitary, ego-driven people who want to create their own private world. I wish you could see the Venn diagram of electronic music production and autism. I wonder how much of the pie is sort of similar. And so I think it's importantly the case that neither of us gets to be completely happy about these records, and that's why they're more than what I could do by myself. I can make records by myself, and I do sometimes, but they're not as compelling to me as art as what I make with Martin.
So let's perhaps move on to you talk about being a control freak and having control, and you've worked with a bunch of other people on their projects. Björk being the big example.
She was in charge of that one.
She was very much.
There were
in charge
no
of that one,
arguments.
of course.
She was right.
I guess, but putting yourself in that mode, how was that completely different? You just tried to do your best with the 80% of the track that she gave you, and she said
I found that experience, like creatively, pretty frustrating. Because, I mean, for my entire life, I'd been in charge of the art that I made. So, and I put a huge store in the back of my mind to knowing that I can do whatever I want. That if in the middle of a show I choose to pull my pants off and sing opera, it's my fucking show, and that's okay because it's my show. And it really, really bugged me that I couldn't pull my pants down and sing opera.
I think you probably could, and nobody would notice, right? Because it's Björk. And
Yeah,
people are
right, Drew.
watching her.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was
No,
hard.
but that was also true, that people weren't looking at me. That was also a big problem for me.
You're just jealous, basically.
That was
wish you were
also a problem.
Why don't we just play a track from the record? Aurora is one
Sure,
that
that's a beautiful. It's too bad we don't have the video.
Yeah, it's really stressed out every time I hear a Björk song because I have an instant like, oh shit, I'm supposed to be on stage. The Björk song has started. Because the first tour was a year long, where we were on tour for a year, like living out of a suitcase and just being on tour for a year nonstop. I'd never really done that before. And it's weird to be part of a big family and a big group and not
Well,
be...
the whole like thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people looking at you was very different from the shows that we play generally too.
Yeah, the first show we played in Paris on that Vespertine tour, we were in the band with Björk, obviously, and Zena Parkins playing harp. And backstage afterwards, Martin and Zena and I were like, fuck, I thought people kind of liked our shows, like they applaud when we're done. But no, like, they don't like our stuff. Like, this is the real thing, because we just walked out and people are screaming, and they're screaming so loud. Like, we had quad monitors, 4 huge monitors all around us, and just the sound of people shrieking and freaking the fuck out because Björk's standing right there was just terrifying. It was really scary. A lot of the shows felt like...
What you were trying to say, it was louder than our monitors.
Yes.
Like, even though there's giant monitors right next to us, I couldn't hear them because people screaming. That's weird.
Stop loving Björk so much, you guys. Get over it. Jesus. Yeah, it was fun to have the opportunity, but fun is a sort of trivial word. I mean, it was really scary because we thought we're going to fuck up her music and we're going to fuck up these shows because we're not very professional. And I think Björk has always had a sort of team of people who can make you kind of bulletproof, and she wants people that are a little bit sloppy and a little bit rough and aren't so used to that. And that wound up being the case when we're there, like, working on programming for Vespertine. And we'd never been in a studio where you paid by the hour ever in our lives. Like,
well, but
I'd never been in one. I mean, we'd only made records at home in our bedroom until all of a sudden we're at Olympic Studios with Spike Sten, and he's mixed fucking Spice Girls and U2 and Madonna, and like we're sitting there going, maybe you should have a breakdown here with like...
And everyone falls silent in the room and goes,
who are you?
and I was like, oh, I'm sorry that I said anything. I'm so sorry.
But I think what Björk wanted,
I was playing SimCity before. I'm gonna do it now. And then they did it, which was cool. Yeah. It was like a stupid MTV show. It was like imposters go to Rocktown, and now that show is over.
I mean, I think
on the other hand, I'm sort of glad that it's over too, because it wasn't my band.
Yeah, it was really fun to work with Björk, and I really enjoyed it, and it gave us opportunities to try things on a scale that we never would have done on our own. I mean, Martin, like, walking rhythmically in a pile of rock salt in front of 60,000 people, wouldn't happen at a Matmos show, but it does at Roskilde.
Just the 60,000 people part.
Yeah, he walks rhythmically on rock salt all the time in Baltimore during the blizzards.
Well, I have to use kitty litter now.
But it's true as well that I really like to make all of a work of art, and being part of a production team for a pop star, even a pop star as experimental and open and free as Björk is, and she's incredibly unusual in that kind of climate, in her willingness to go to places aesthetically that other people on that scale won't go, is still part of a very different kind of ecology or ecosystem of how you contribute and what it means to contribute. And I gotta say, I kind of like making Matmos records where I get to make all of it, even if only 10,000 people hear it or 15,000 people hear it versus millions of people hearing a Björk record. And it's not like one is more authentic than the other or one is better. I think it has more to do with my particular skill set. There's people who would be incredible producers of pop music who are making incredibly cool sounding pop music all the time. It's just not me. And that was part of the humbling reality of like working with Björk, was like I wasn't a great producer for Björk. I wasn't very good at listening emotionally to where she wanted to take a particular track. I was too caught up.
Like we get lost in like, no, but what about this fucked up weird detail that would?
Why do you want one snare? Why don't you have 10 different snare sounds?
That's what I mean, Drew had to point out to me about 1,000 times during that thing that people who make pop music, hopefully, want to make pop music, and it's not like people who make weird noisy music wish they were making pop music, because I kept feeling like, why doesn't she do something weirder? It's like, well, because that's not what.
Well, and from her point of view, she had written those songs. Like Vespertine is Björk's album. She had written melodies, she had written lyrics. The music was constructed, and we were there to contribute like production ideas and percussive patterns and sequences, but you're essentially doing the equivalent of like set design for a play that somebody else has written, where they've got the big story and you're there to assist them in telling that big story. And I think there's better and worse, more and less egotistical ways of serving the interests of a song. Whereas from our point of view, we're all about collage and all about sound and all about chopping radically and all about avoiding belonging in a genre. And voices hog mid-range. It's just true.
Yeah, the human voice robs all the fun of music making for me.
That's like, a little extreme.
I don't know. I mean, that's what, like, as soon as someone's speaking or singing, it's over for the rest of the sounds. The rest of the sounds now have become in a support role for the human voice.
I think you're going too far,
man.
But it's true.
Look at the EQ on a mixing board. Where if they're gonna put a set of parametrics on it, where are they? Oh, they're right in the human voice range. Why? Because fucking 99% of what we do is listen to human voices. Like, it's not even like a matter of
why don't you stop talking and protest?
Mixing. It's a matter of, because you just want me to stop talking. You don't want to stop human voices. You just want to stop mine.
Well, to produce around Björk, we had to go with ultra lows.
And it worked.
Ultra lows or ultra highs. So that's why we have a lot of crispy, like bacon frying noises as hi-hats and things. Or like take her little spit sounds of her lips separating and amplify them massively and up the high end and then chop the lows and then do it again and then do it again and then do it again and step it up 2 octaves. Then you've got something high enough that it won't interrupt Björk. So she can hog the mid-range and we can write bass lines and write really crispy high end. And it was just our way of solving a problem acoustically of like, how do you make space for a vocal that's that huge?
If you're listening to Vespertine and listening to a track, perhaps not Aurora, what can you pinpoint and say, okay, that's what Matmos added. That's the set design tiny bit that
I mean, it's tricky because the way that she worked on that album was to get Marcus DeVries to program rhythms, and we would program rhythms. And she
had like 125 tracks that she then was like, oh, this from here and 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 this from here.
She would wait till it was the day to mix a song, and she'd go down the mixing board and she'd mute everything and she'd just listen. And sometimes she'd have like a Matthew Herbert kick drum pattern and a Matmos snare. And these were patterns that had never been made to go with each other, but she was just listening to, well, what actually works, what actually serves the song. And it was highly, like, collectivist in a weird way, even though it sounds like a total dictatorial thing on her part where she's the auteur in charge. It was not like there was any one person whose total vision was getting expressed. It was very much this collective model, and she was in charge. So I feel like when I hear Vespertine now, and I don't listen to it often just because it's maybe too like nostalgic or something, it's tricky. Like I can hear at the end of Unison, like we did all pretty much of the rhythms for Unison. We did a lot of the rhythms for Aurora, but the snow crunching was, I think Marcus DeVries did that for her. It's such a clusterfuck that it's kind of hard for me to put my finger on what's us.
Do you think artists who work with you on your own records add things, feel the same way at the end?
Yeah, we don't give them long enough generally so they get to feel good or bad or anything. Like generally it's like about an hour.
People come over and they think that we're all going to jam and like play together, and then it turns out to be this kind of weirdly cold thing that's more like a photo shoot or something. You know,
like,
where they're
go like whoa, 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 whoa.
Okay,
Go
do that
ahead.
again. Okay, again.
Like along with nothing, because then we just cut it, stretch it, do whatever we like to make it fit into the song.
I mean,
So yeah, it's barely like playing music.
It depends. I mean, there's so many ways to collaborate now with people, whether you can, like, I would shoot an email to this guy, Rudolf Aber, in Japan and say, will you record kendo rehearsals? And he'll just record himself doing kendo, and then he'll send that to us. And that's one kind of collaboration. Another would be, like, getting the Kronos Quartet to come to our house and record their string part. And it's for a song that's a tribute to Joe Meek. And because he would mic strings in this very kind of ghetto lo-fi way, we're recording like the fucking Kronos Quartet, but we're doing it with just 2 mics in one room, and that's all there is to it. It's not particularly hi-fi.
Well, that was overwrought collaboration where we had to send our fucked up, cut up music to a transcriber who listened to a tape and then wrote it out in staff form for the Kronos Quartet to then play, and that was just this amazing. Have you ever used like Babelfish, translator, where you type something in and then it comes out, and then you do it again a couple times and it comes out like this crazy poetry? That's what this was like, only using like this human being as a filter for sound. Like, okay, take our messed up thing that we made with all these plugins and filters and stuff and turn that into sheet music that a string quartet will now play, including all this stuff that we sort of assumed that he would ignore. Like this sort of like... like, there they were, like... we were like, oh, is that on there? And they're like, yeah, that's, that was amazing. I forget how okay, so yeah. And then we ended up cutting out those things that he had laboriously transcribed onto paper that were things that should have been cut out in the first place.
I mean, I
it was
think
really expensive too.
The records often become sort of like...
people are expensive. Those.
No, it was a trade-off, remember?
What, for that? With Lev?
Oh, yeah, no. Arrangers are expensive. Kronos weren't
right.
expensive.
No, it was the arranger cost... Yeah.
Anyway.
Not doing that again.
Do you
Actually,
find
we worked with an awesome arranger then. Last time we played in London, we did a...
Anna Meredith, a Scottish composer,
Anna
really
Meredith,
incredible.
fucking amazing. Listen to our...
She did a version of Supreme Balloon for 20-piece strings and horns, and that was really fun to get to play.
The London Contemporary Orchestra.
It was weird to play like an entirely like, modular synthesizer noodling jam, and to treat that as something that you could notate and then have played by traditional instruments. And it really exposes your like boneheaded cave person, like compositional retardedness on a scale that's quite shaming. Reminds me of like Deep Purple live at the Albert Hall.
You mentioned Supreme Balloon, and it seems like that album was quite a departure in terms of the way that you constructed it, in terms of from your past work. Can you describe a little bit about why and what the difference was?
Well, that was my album. It
Right.
was my turn.
I didn't want to exactly.
That's why, yeah. But I was just like, oh, let's swing away from the concept. Like we're the band that does the goofy samples of things.
Yeah, it was
band.
getting too much of a wackiness ghetto. If you're in the wacky ghetto too long, it's annoying. Because people are like, oh my God, they made a song with snails. There's a song out of burning human flesh. How kooky, So we thought, let's not use.
So I thought no microphones at all. We'll do all synthesis.
Should we play a track?
Yeah,
briefly.
sure. Yeah. Which one are you going to play? I'm so curious.
Cloudhoppers?
Interesting choice. Okay.
Or Supreme Balloon?
Either one.
I'd go. What about the
We can go with anything that you'd like, I think.
Let Todd pick.
Okay, let Todd. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I guess I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the construction of the album, and because there's you went to a lot of interesting places and to find these old modular synthesizers.
Yeah, we use a sort of what once we've got an idea, we use a sort of watercourse method. Like we just we try to let the world tell us what the hell it is that we should be doing with this. I mean, to a certain extent. It was amazing that during the time that we were working on that record, that we were asked to come to the INA GRM in Paris, which is the sort of home of musique concrète. It's the foundation that guy, Pierre Schaeffer, started as part of Radio France that's still going. God bless the French who so believe in experimental culture that it's still receiving full funding in an attempt to create a classical music without pitches.
Try to imagine the British Ministry of Cubism. Where there's a Ministry of Cubism that funds Cubist paintings.
Still $1 million a year, since 1930.
And at the INA GRM, they had this incredible Alibaba's cave of weird old gear in the basement that none of them were using because they've all gone digital and they've all gone software. And we said, can we see and access some of this old stuff?
What do you guys have in the basement?
And they had this thing called the Coupigny that was designed in the 60s by this engineer, Francis Coupigny. And it's a little bit like the EMS Synthy. It's 10 oscillators. No ADSR, so there's no wave shaping. You connect and chain oscillators to other oscillators through a matrix pin system. So there's a matrix in which 3 different lengths can create 3 different kinds of connections. You can have signal modulate signal, signal modulate voltage, or voltage modulate voltage. So the different densities construct these different relationships as you sort of cascade one sound into another. And it was it was 10 oscillators.
10 anybody, modular synthesis people? Anybody? It's crazy. Fucking 10 oscillators, and that was practically all. It's really impractical.
So you can
from a musical standpoint. This thing was not made to make music. It was made to make insane noises. Nobody was ever going to be like, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da. There was no keyboard on it and no way to hook up a keyboard to it. I mean, beautiful.
Here, I can play you some examples of just what the Coupigny sounds like if you want to hear it kind of roaring and going off. Let's see if it's in here. Oh, no, it won't be.
Yep, I saw Coupigny files under Matmos. I swear I saw him.
Oh, I think it's... Oh, it's on this one, sorry. Oh no, a glitch. How embarrassing. We also made various pilgrimages to players of synthesizers that were able to get performances that we aren't capable of doing. Okay, here's an example of the Coupigny going off.
Well, also on your albums, of course, you guys always talk about, oh, okay, this album's the medical album, but, you have people playing
Guitars.
clarinet, guitars. Like the concept has never been the end all be all. It's been like a guide, but you're willing to make exceptions.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to make listenable music. I mean, it's not, there's a certain, like purer art is like, okay, here was the concept, we executed the concept, and these are the results. And that's that.
Take it or leave it. The Saul LeWitt idea that the concept is a machine that creates the work. That's from his paragraphs on conceptual art. It's one of these important manifestos of conceptual art as a technique. And it's very disinterested in execution and craft. It's all about the concept is the work. We're whores. Like, we want to make a record that you want to listen to, that you want to tap your toes to, that you want to hear more than once, ideally. And to that extent,
but that also fulfills... those conceptual ideals as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I want to have the conceptual cake and eat it as a pop dessert too, I guess is the point. That you want to have like gone to all the trouble of getting snails to interrupt the path of a laser that's aimed at a light-sensitive theremin, but you want the solo played by those snails to actually sound cool.
And I guess that goes into the performative aspect of what you do in terms of making it, clearly electronic music has had this bad rap performatively of people looking at a laptop, and you go out of your way to replicate sort of what you're doing in the studio to make sure that people have this something to look at, something to engage with.
Yes.
And I guess we'll be seeing a video.
It's a very dark video, so imagine...
Oh, is it impossible to see? It looks fine on here. I'm sorry. Maybe
Keep going.
This is just stupid to even try.
No, just let it play.
Yeah.
It makes me laugh when I hear the little voices going, okay, go for it. All right. Because they're all from these free CDs that you get when you buy nicotine patches. And the CDs are about encouraging you that, like, you can quit smoking. You really can. It's going to work. And there's all these, like, sounds of, like, coworkers sort of celebrating their freedom from tobacco.
Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Congratulations on your decision to stop smoking.
Yeah.
And Martin was on the patch for 15 years. You're supposed to be on it for like 2 weeks and then just get over it.
No,
but we
2
have this,
months.
We have this like Arrested Development thing for like 15 years.
17
So we
years.
just had all these CDs laying around. And I thought, fuck, I've got to use this stuff because it just sounds so square and like uncool. Like when they're like, yeah, let's party.
Let's party by not being too excessive.
And that sort of gets at
Let's
the
be
soft
prudent.
Gets at the soft pink truth, which is like me trying to make dance music, but I've always had a very alienated and like weird relationship to dance music because being a closeted fag in Kentucky that was into hardcore, I felt like I couldn't be into dance music because that's what would make me gay, right? When I was in the closet, there's this feeling of like gay people like erasure. And like I like Black Flag. I don't relate to queer people, so I must not be gay because I like guitars. So I better stay in the
Thank
closet.
heavens the Japanese model of your look and your lifestyle have no connection to the music that you listen to at all.
Yeah.
Has now taken
Or like
over
Tokyo
the entire
Hotel.
world, like Tokyo
You look
Hotel.
at Tokyo Hotel and you're like, damn, they look badass. And then you hear them, you're like, fuck, this is the worst music I've ever heard in my life.
This is a radical thing that's happened over the last 20 years, the like separation.
The final death of authenticity.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, like Stopping Truth is like my like stupid issues of shame about queerness and dance music finally like overcompensating through this very like pleasure-oriented, just fun, ridiculous project.
And you said you've been doing quite a few more shows in Baltimore.
Yeah, in Baltimore, because like we moved from San Francisco where everyone is cold and chilly and sort of folds their arms and is here because the blog said it might be good and they can't wait to post the first message that in fact it's not good. Whereas in Baltimore, like people don't give a fuck and they just want to have a good time and get sweaty and dance because their lives are miserable because they live in an economic crater. And so
It's maybe not that dramatic.
no, well, kind of.
It's not that extreme, but there definitely isn't the sort of like, there's definitely a lot more like people are not trying to get famous because they live in Baltimore, so they're quite sure that nothing is ever going to happen, so that they're in fact actually just making music to entertain illuminate the people who came to the show who are their friends.
Yeah.
And they aren't looking beyond that.
Maybe this is the problem of
the
like
people go to the shows to be amused and illuminated by their friends making music, and that's the whole thing ends there. It's amazing. You remember like, oh, that's right. That's what we do. There isn't this like third generation like cynical sort of like, well, if I was trying to really make it, then I'd move to Brooklyn or
Berlin, baby.
or Berlin or like I can't really make music here.
Who would I be making it for? So yeah, that ratio of discourse to presence, like maybe Baltimore has like minimal discourse, maximum presence, and maybe San Francisco sort of, for us, had turned into like minimal presence, maximum discourse.
Do you feel like it's changed or going to change the way that you make music as Matmos?
Yeah.
Well, it's certainly made. Drew's very busy being a professor. I mean, that's what he does now. But like, it's totally taught me a new way of thinking about playing. I mean, it's a city that seems to have been based more on, or the scene that we're involved with anyway, seems to be more based on like improv jazz
and noise.
And then that sort of these worlds have collided. The sort of like noise and rock and punk and this free jazz sort of thing have all collided. And there's so many people who like make their own gear and do free improv shows with it, or like there's crazy people who make their own synthesizers playing with trombonists, nobody has any money for like a PA, so everything is
through a shitty guitar amp.
Through guitar amps, and it's all very much based on sort of do it yourself, what we can afford aesthetics. This is we had to draw the line when we moved there. I was like, because I live by the PA. I cannot abide fucking guitar amplifiers. Ugh.
Yeah, it's weird. I never felt bourgeois.
So we bought a PA.
Until I moved to Baltimore, and we were asking for monitor speakers at a show, and people are looking at us like we just asked for a carriage and 8 horses or something. They're just like, who the hell do you think you are, princess? I was like, well, I just want some monitor speakers.
Yeah, can I just hear what I'm doing?
But,
no, dude,
it's weird.
We don't have those.
It was inspiring. I mean, going to shows for like a year in Baltimore, I never saw someone play a laptop, and I never saw a rock band. People are not interested. And they can't afford it. So instead, they're playing like fucked up weird stuff that they built themselves and cobbled together, and it sounds kind of amazing. I mean, it's been a real inspiration to be taken out of our comfort zone. And I loved San Francisco, but I really felt by the end of living there for 17 years that it was coasting on a reputation of countercultural bohemian otherness that had not been economically viable since about 1979. Like the reality of what the software industry did was to give us incredible tools that have made it possible for like charlatans like myself to make music. So I'm incredibly grateful to that industry. But that industry also displaced a whole class of people from that city, and we were part of it. We got evicted at Christmas one year, like right during the middle of the big boom, because people want evicted at Christmas. Oh. But it was just a reality, and moving to Baltimore, I mean, people live there on like $250 a month, and that's all they need. So it changes your priorities.
Let's just open it up to questions, I think. Does anyone have anything?
Yes, in the back, you.
We're just wait for a microphone for a second.
I have like 2 questions because you guys seem really like I can talk to you about anything. Yeah. First thing, what's your favorite body part?
I'm gonna make a guess about Martin's favorite body part.
Okay.
And I'm gonna guess that Martin's favorite body part is the back of the neck.
Oh.
Wrong. Well, I mean that depends what you're. I mean.
Whose body?
Yeah, whose body? What are we doing with it? I mean, my definitely hand.
Okay.
Like as far as like, I mean, useful, handy.
And
I like the tongue.
Oh, the tongue. That's really nice.
Yeah.
But for sexy stuff, that's different. I mean,
no, I'm talking about language.
What do I like looking at on other people?
Language. And your other question?
Oh, I heard that it's really common in Baltimore to call women buckets. Is that true?
I've never heard that.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly. Bucket? Where did you hear that?
Well, we got to start saying that
How
shit.
rude.
Does anyone else have any questions for Matmos? Don't be shy.
Pass the mic.
I just struggled to think of something to ask you because I don't really have a question, but I just think you guys are really funny. And I think your laugh is really good. Have you recorded that? There's this like...
Yeah, I mean, I have that Ernie like
It's
kind of
really
sound
cool.
that I make. On the first cassette, we made a cassette called Matmos in Low Fidelity that's all like weird, messed up. It's in mono, 8-bit cut-ups, and there's a lot of Martin laughing and me laughing and a lot of like sounds that are very kind of domestic and private. And it was when we started as a band and as a couple, and I think since then I kind of don't. We used it a little bit on the West too. It's in the final breakdown at the end of that. There's like a 22-minute collage, and at the end there's a lot of us laughing and kind of like fucking up each other's voices. Yeah. We're really close. You could just kind of talk,
Yeah, I was really interested with your idea of how you're trying to do experimental or a conceptual kind of art and music, but you also said that you want it to be listenable and to an extent. Some of the work I do, I struggle with that idea. Is like, do you think that sometimes by trying to make the music listenable, you're sort of sacrificing a little bit from the idea or the whole concept? Or
Yeah, it's certainly like it's not pure.
I think it depends. I mean, I think listenability, like you think of it like an Aphex Twin track like Ventolin, like is that listenable or not? Like it's like getting into a hot bath, right? Like the second your foot's in it, you're like, fuck, that's hot. But then within an hour, you're like, oh, okay. So listenability is a couple. Yeah, hopefully it doesn't take you an hour to get into that. It's cold by then. Anyway, it's contextual, and it's sort of the frame of a given record might establish what is listenable or not for that record. But yeah, I think there's a huge risk in watering down what you're doing in order to please some imaginary listener that you think is out there who's a little more scared than you. And that's not a great approach to making art, is imagining that you have to kind of like please some invisible demographic like hallucination. I think trusting yourself and trusting that other people are just as interested as you are is a better way to go. And honestly, the person that modeled that for us the most was Björk, because she's not somebody who's sitting in the studio going, oh, this is too weird. Like, she doesn't really have that attitude. And that's weird because she's the one where there's a certain amount of pressure of if she's too weird, it will sell, this much instead of that much or whatever. Whereas for us, I don't really feel like these issues are at stake. I think in terms of the Surgery record, we wanted to make it as poppy and in a weird way, like toe-tapping as possible, because it was made out of skulls and fat and blood. And it would be very easy to make an alienating, industrial, Marilyn Manson-style, aren't I scary kind of record out of those sounds, but it wouldn't be compelling. There'd be no dialectic. You wouldn't be transforming Surgery by making Surgery scary. Surgery's already scary, so there's no magic trick in doing that. Whereas if you can make it sound like something that could just play in a fucking W hotel lobby, and then you realize that it's made out of the fat of rich people, then you're like, oh, whoa, ew. And that's more compelling. So that's kind of why that record was the way it was.
The one I wanted
She has a question.
hang on, I wanted to carry on with that and play. There was a song that we made where we were like, we need a bass line, and we could not get a satisfactory bass line sound out of it from Quasi-Object, but I can't remember what song it is.
Stupid Fumble.
Yeah, so okay, we were like, okay, we're gonna make this song all out of balloons and whoopee cushions. Go ahead and just roll it. I just go into it some more. The intro is too long. So this is all balloons, and I was like, it wants a funky bass sound, not to sound like fucking Britney Spears or something. It needs a funky bass sound. And balloons were just not doing it. And I was like, why don't we use a synthesizer? You know? And I don't think we argued about it in a bad way, but it was like, because that's not a balloon. That's why we don't use a synthesizer, Martin. It's like, yeah, but the song wants a good bass line. So we use a synthesizer, you know, and the song is no longer conceptually pure. So, but I swear that bass is coming soon.
It's about 90% balloon.
Not a balloon. Anyway, so there's a good example of
Being impure on purpose, you know, and it must be said, like, discovering early Matthew Herbert records as Dr. Rocket was a huge, you know, sort of touchstone of this approach too. I mean, we can't kind of not pour one out for his technique and his skill, because it's a sort of parallel evolution. I think like Björk was at a party and played him our record, and then he emailed us, and we've been friends ever since. And it's been kind of cool to see somebody else who's also interested in this, but he comes from like a jazz training and like a deeply musical awareness, whereas we come from like a noise background where we're slowly getting more musical over the years, but we started like feeling like a fair amount of hostility to real music. She has a question.
Could I just ask you to kind of look back at your career, and if you were to think of one or two or more moments when, you know, you felt really satisfied and said, okay, this is why we drive ourselves crazy, or this feels really good, like this, it's worth it, it's okay, you know. What are those?
I am definitely getting that satisfaction a lot out of I've been doing all these shows that are just pure improv lately, and I realize I'm going to pleasure myself here a little bit, which I guess is necessary to answer that question. But like, I've realized that I've trained myself to get great sounds out of whatever object I put my hands on now. You know, whether it be I feel like I can get, I don't know, you know, not the best, but like I know how to play this can, like just by looking at it and holding it, and that's what I've been loving about these pure improv things lately is we start with nothing, and I'll play The Room, and it'll get sampled, or the other people, and I really get like a good deal of pleasure out of like having worked on that particularly bizarre skill for a long time and having it generate stuff successfully.
I mean, I think there's been a lot of moments, because 18 years is a long time. It's moving if because records are kind of a message in a bottle, and you put it out there and you just have no idea if it resonates for other people, and it's a little weird and alienating, and you're caught up in the workflow of creating it, and then it's done. But when you get to perform something and it loops back to the context that it was about, that's powerful. And we made a song on The Rose Has Teeth in the Mouth of a Beast, which is a record of queer portraits of people that we admire, where we learn about their biography, we reenact events from their life, and then we make music out of the sounds generated during the reenactments of events from their life. And we made a track about this guy, James Bidgood, who made this incredible film, this sort of quasi-pornographic, dreamy film called Pink Narcissus. And we had basically assumed that he was dead. And almost everybody that the songs were about, they were all dead, or almost all of them. And then we learned that, oh my God, James Bidgood is actually alive. Someone had found him living in a tenement hotel, like near suicide, and at a serious rock bottom, with a lot of the prints of his photography just sort of sitting in like shoe boxes in a closet and just at the edge. And basically rescued him and kind of brought back his art career. And we got to perform live our song about him to him, because Anthony of Anthony and the Johnsons did this benefit that was Anthony and Coco Rosie and Matmos doing this benefit for a queer homeless youth shelter in Brooklyn. And so at that concert, and Anthony sings on the song.
of ours about James Bidgood. And so we got to do this kind of serenade where James Bidgood was sitting on stage and Antony's singing to him, and we're playing our samples of, like, I contact mic'd a sheet of paper and I watched Pink Narcissus and I jerked off and recorded the sound of my semen splashing onto a piece of paper as my heart was racing watching this movie. So I'm kind of transmitting these amplified sounds of my heart beating and my semen, you know, and like I'm sort of splashing it all over James Bidgood. And, you know, it's the most like ridiculously masturbatory thing possible. But if you want to look for like what was a sort of artistic money shot moment, you know, that might be it.
And if you ever see him interviewed, or he's the kind of guy who would appreciate that kind of, he's just like a filthy old man. we were interviewed for this well-meaning gay documentary
about like intergenerational respect between different eras of gay artists, you know.
And he looks at the camera and he's like, I don't want to fucking talk about that. I want to fucking talk about drugs. And we were like, yes, I love this guy.
Thanks.
Hi.
Surely you've heard enough of us.
I have a question.
Yes,
Hi.
please.
You were talking about conceptual purity, and you were talking about respecting it to a certain degree and then kind of breaking it. I think that's really interesting. Do you think that that purity is something better than like subverting?
I think they each kind of travel towards different demographics. Like, you know, there's that Japanese guy Aub who made this record called Pages of the Book, which is just Bibles being burned, and it's just an hour of the burning of a Bible, and it's a pure conceptual art kind of piece, you know, and that's what that is. We made a record where you can hear the pages of Bibles turning, but there's also an acoustic guitar that plays a very empty, sort of melancholic figure. Like, ours is more musical than Aub. I don't think that makes ours better.
I think the sound of the page, the acoustic guitar is not doing all the work. I genuinely think the sound of that page, it's great recording.
It's 50-50. I mean, what we did...
It's definitely doing some of the work of telegraphing the feeling that ends up being there.
Yeah, if you put a right microphone and a left microphone on either side of a Bible and close mic it, and you get a nice stereo field of like an old Bible with a sort of vellum-y print paper that makes a good rustling sound as it strikes the air. You know, there's a lot materially there if you want to work with it and really kind of caress it and deal with it as an object that could make an interesting musical sound. I think as long as you're compelled by what you're hearing, then there's purity, whether there's a guitar or not, you know?
Sure, it's more about the thrill. Sometimes you seek a concept to seek bigger thrills, right? Is it?
Well, I think you have to realize that when you're curating the information about telling someone it's a Bible rather than just a book, that's a huge artistic choice, and it becomes very loaded. And sometimes we tell people stuff and sometimes we don't. Like on the first record, there's a collage that involves something that we just call Polish trains. And we didn't mention that they're the trains that go to Auschwitz, because we kind of felt that if we had done that, it would be sort of clobbering people too hard and it's too loaded, and you'd better fucking bring it if you're gonna even reference that. So we felt like dialing it back in terms of the information. The sound is there, and we know what it means, and I guess now you guys do. But it was an important decision, I think, to be kind of controlling about how much information is the right amount, you know? And that's an artistic decision.
And isn't there some sort of, you know, pleasure in keeping those mysteries to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, when we did our porno soundtrack work, because we made the soundtracks to like 6 porn films, we would hide all kinds of...
That would be for money.
Yeah, we were young.
By the way, it wasn't like, yeah, we did that for art. No, we were paying the rent.
Yeah, they wanted like 100 minutes of music, and they'd give you $1,000, but you only had like 3 days.
That's right, 100 minutes. Those of you who have worked for weeks on a 3-minute song, like, yeah, that was an awesome, like, yeah, we need 100 minutes. Yeah, we need it Friday. Okay.
So you just make like ridiculous,
Thank you.
Fake Portishead, fake 9 Inch Nails, like fake. But yeah, we would hide things, esoteric things that were pleasing ourselves, like things that were not erotic but
really disgusting, but that we would sort of hide inside the porno soundtrack because we're just corny like that.
You reversed voices on that, I think.
Yeah, that was one thing we did. Yeah.
The porno sound. Oh,
Oops,
sorry. The porno soundtrack's the one thing I wanted to ask you about. Is they asked for 100 minutes of music, but then they would like take 3 minutes and then just loop it. They didn't really care about it.
Yeah, I think they were like, oh, these guys will be good. We can get 6 films out of them. And they would just take stuff and cut it and put it and paste it into other movies.
Yeah,
it's like they didn't care that much about what the art they were making. When we originally started doing that, we were doing these like careful, like timed out by the scenes, and like the climaxes would occur.
Yeah.
And
do the cymbal crash when the poppers guy comes in, and
and all this, and man, they just so did not care and just slapped it on the movie like wrong.
They had a great slogan about how to approach it. They're like, "Don't be interesting." That was like job one. Don't
he was like,
be
guys, don't make it too interesting. What an awesome command for art.
Yeah.
Like, what is I mean,
Probably don't want the music to be getting in the way.
I mean, if you're
Exactly.
a painter and someone asks you to make your painting not so interesting, are you then a designer?
Oh.
That was so the reaction that I wanted. Like, ow!
Oh, meow, Martin.
Because then it's not, I mean, what is...
Right, you were cut off.
What is the function of, I mean, what is it? What is music that's not, is that what Muzak is?
Muzak is more than music.
And I think that was their slogan.
Yeah.
And I think they literally meant the opposite of that, and that's why that slogan is so good, because it's less than music.
Boring music makes boring work less boring, is the sort of core idea there. And I mean, sadly, if you think about the ease with which you could buy Ableton and know nothing about what you wanted to do, but just kick around some plugins and some soft synths and some impulse drum kits, like the sort of de-skilling of electronic music itself is a serious concern. I think it ought to be of a concern to everybody in this room, right? Is that it's precisely vastly too easy to make electronic music now of a certain sort. And that doesn't mean that therefore you have to, like rip your ovaries out to make something good. But it does mean that you're your own worst enemy when you're making electronic music, because it is too easy to take it about 30% of the way there.
I think you guys kind of just answered my question with that little performance, but I was about to ask you if like there was no audience and you're just making an album just for you personally, not even for each other, just for you, how different would that sound from what you make already?
Wow. I mean, people often, when they're defensive, say, yeah, I make my records for myself, and if other people like it, that's cool, but really it's for myself. And I've always felt very frustrated by that attitude, because you are communicating to other people, and it matters. Like, you don't want to pander to an imaginary version of other people when you're making the art. You don't want to cut corners, and you don't want to be like, would you like it more if I went like that for a while? Like, don't do that, obviously. But the record's not really completed.
Unless you're having sex.
The record's not completed until it's out there in the world, and until it's part of a social network that you can't control.
Do you think that music has to have like an audience to have a purpose, or like just say for some reason you're making an album that's not going to be listened to, no one's going to even like open it until you die, like.
Sure.
That's hard for me to think about. I mean, literally wrap my mind like this. Make an album that no one will listen to.
Well, I've thought about I've thought about it
that you like still, but just
right.
Me, I don't know.
Do you need? I mean, I've seen the way that if you do put out a record and it does get this sort of reaction,
we've
not
made
that
records
one.
that no one.
Yeah, totally. It does. It contaminates. It contaminates your process if you start to go, oh, well, the last reviews said it was too mellow, and so let's make a harsh record, and this sort of pendulum swing that you're doing in reaction to discourse, I think that's really worrying and damaging, and you have to find ways to try to insulate yourself from it. You know, I mean, maybe making a record that nobody will ever hear. I mean, there's that Emily Dickinson model, right, of like my letters to a world that never spoke to me, you know, that this idea of you just create in your lonely room and you create for the joy of creation. I think that Henry Darger model of the outsider artist, like painters like Henry Darger or Achilles Rizzoli, you know, they're models that seem like these sort of sacred monsters of creativity because they don't care and they don't sweat it. But I think it's important to be able to test what you're doing in front of an audience and to experience that.
You talk about discourse and being damaging potentially, but you reviewed records for Pitchfork and other sites and other places.
I know. I feel like an asshole. Giving numeric ratings to records is something that really troubles me, and that's why when I wrote for Pitchfork, I would write like, this is a great song, but I wouldn't take someone's album and go, well, this is a 7.2. It's not really a 7.4 because it doesn't have that certain resonance that a 7.4 would have, that a 7.2. I think that's really annoying. On the other hand, the opportunity to talk to a lot of people about something that I think is amazing that might get ignored is just something I don't want to pass up. I don't feel like journalists are the enemy or something. Like, I was making a punk rock zine before I was in a punk rock band. I don't think the divisions are all that awful. But I think we're in a moment now because of blogs and because of the internet where a universal climate of canny, snarky knowingness prevails and people's egos are built up by being the first person to have liked something, and if too many other people have liked it too, then that's contaminating, and this sort of quest for cultural capital that keeps having these diminishing returns in the form of people not being able to have careers anymore because they're uncool by the time their album's actually out. By the time it's actually in a store, it's so ontic that it's banal, and who needs to buy it? And let's move on to the next one. I mean, Jay-Z's right again, on to the next one. That's exactly the attitude that prevails in the way that music discourse has been so accelerated now. And now I just sound like an old person.
Yeah, I don't know. I sometimes feel like, no one could make another record and we could be pretty satisfied for, 5 years on just listening to the records that no one bothered to listen to twice from the last 100 years. I mean, like, you look at, I swear, half of the Wire review section is like reissues of records you've never even heard. Like, you've never heard that are pretty darn good, you know? Records from the, 60s and 70s, all this amazing fucking electronic music that, yeah. Who needs new records? Blah. Stop.
You know who you're talking to, right?
Yeah. Well,
I think that returns to the question of whether you want to get pleasure in the process and whether you want to make things because they're driving you crazy until you complete them. And if you respect the force with which they're nagging at you enough to really devote yourself to it, then you'll probably make something that will be worth listening to, hopefully now, maybe 10 years from now. But life is long. I mean, we were making songs together for 4 years before we put out a record. 4 or 5 years of just making tracks and sending them back and forth to each other and working on them again and again without any idea that anybody was going to listen. And we sent out...
And we're perfectly happy. I mean, you'd better be happy with it. You better be... God knows, you'd better be happy with making albums that no one will listen to, because it's unlikely that anyone's ever going to listen to them.
But,
I feel like we've been unconscionably lucky that other people listen to our stuff, but I swear that I would have been happy had no one besides my friends ever listened.
Well, yeah,
to
like
stuff,
Martin made this,
and I would continue making this stuff.
He made a vinyl record, Moods for Misty Evenings, and when we moved, we still have these giant cases of Moods for Misty Evenings. No one bought it, no one cared, and when we started to make Matmos, nobody was interested.
This was like in 1987.
We sent out demos to labels, and we sent out letters, and we tried to get people interested, and we got rejection letters. Like, techno labels were like, no, this is fucking noise, this is bullshit. And noise people were like, this is silly, this isn't noise enough.
Shit?
So we just got thumbs down, thumbs down, thumbs down. So we put ourselves out on our own label, Total Vanity label, where we just think we're like
you know, pleasing ourselves, and it's just going to embarrass us every
Like a
time we move.
chinchilla.
We're going to have like thousands of copies of the CD that no one gives a shit about. And we put out our own record ourselves on our own vanity label, and like Rough Trade London took 10, I guess, and one of the 10 people that bought it was Björk. And she calls us, and we do a remix, and then we're in her band. I mean, it actually can happen. So
If you want to be in Björk's band.
Are there any other questions? All right.
Let's eat lunch.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
thanks for your time.